Yesterday was the competition debut of NASCAR's high downforce, low horsepower package. And I decided to take a night, think about exactly what I saw before I went on camera and kind of did a review, talked about some of the positives and a lot of the red flags that kind of popped up during this race about what this package is probably going to do. Now, my conclusion, I'll just say right up front, is that this was a very typical Atlanta race. It wasn't special. It wasn't super horrible. It wasn't super great. It felt a lot like last year's Atlanta race. I mean, and the years before, it just felt like a Gen 6 race at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And I kind of understand why the drivers have said and the fans have said that they don't want a repave of Atlanta Motor Speedway. Atlanta Motor Speedway is one of, if not absolutely bar none, the most difficult track in NASCAR. It is low grip. There's a lot of sliding around. There's a lot of input a driver can make to make the car go fast around Atlanta. And as I'm going to talk to you about a lot later on in this video, is that no matter what package you throw at Atlanta, no matter how much you try to take that driver skill out, as Kyle Busch mentioned earlier in the season, and yeah, there was a little bit of an oopsie a couple of times for Kyle Busch, which was ironic to say the least. But the more you try to do that, it's not going to matter. Atlanta, in its current form, is always going to produce a similar show. Now, that being said, there are some, I won't say conclusions, but like I mentioned earlier, there are some red flags that I can throw up immediately and tell you that there were some things that really stuck out to me as things that might be detrimental to racing once they get to Atlanta Motor Speedway. And I'm sure it's already been written in the comments, David, this wasn't the full package. Don't judge it until Las Vegas Motor Speedway. And quite honestly, the only difference between this package and the Las Vegas package are aero ducts, and they've used aero ducts in the past, and it really hasn't made much of a difference, especially at the Cup level. I think they used them in 2015 at Indianapolis and at Michigan, and those shows were not any better. So what we have here and what we have at Las Vegas is virtually identical. The difference, of course, is the smoothness of the track and what that is going to do once they get to a track that doesn't have an abrasive surface. But again, I think we got enough of a preview here to make some predictions about what we're going to see at Las Vegas and further on down the line. And I think Kamikaze Games made a great point. In fact, I'm going to reference him a couple times in this video just because I think he's kind of relevant to the discussion. He made the great point that there's always going to be an excuse, especially this year, about the package. Okay, the Daytona race, specifically the races prior to the Daytona 500, they were terrible. The excuse was, well, they're not running the 2019 package. We get to Atlanta, and I would say fans are mixed on it. It's not like outrage, but it's also not like, well, that was the greatest race ever. But the excuse is, for the people who didn't like it or are pointing out that it was virtually the exact same race as last year, it's not the full 2019 package. So when you get to Vegas, most of the excuses are going to be off the table. But then you get back to Phoenix or whatever I think it's Phoenix after that. You're going to get to Phoenix, and if the race sucks, everybody's going to say, well, they're using the 750 horsepower package. And it's like, okay, that's not an excuse. And especially because, again, we've seen that aero ducts don't make that much of a difference. The big difference is the track, and that's going to be the key between Las Vegas and Atlanta. That being said, I do want to say some positive things about this race. I don't necessarily think they are package related. Well, one of them's package related. I will give the package at least an initial thumbs up. Specifically, the start of the race, the first probably 10 laps, where you had tight, close, multi-groove racing. You saw a lot of cars coming up through the field and making a lot of passes, specifically Kyle Larson and Kevin Harvick really coming up through the field very quickly. and it was very exciting. It actually reminded me a lot of a 2001 era IRL race. I know that's not going to mean a whole lot to most people, but you can go on YouTube and search what those races look like, particularly at the starts of them. That felt a lot like it to me. But of course, then you got into what happened after the first 10 laps and the tires fell off. But we'll get into that a little bit later. I do want to talk specifically in terms of a positive about the second stage stint with Kevin Harvick and Kyle Larson. I thought, here's the thing. People always ask me, because I complain so much about NASCAR, they're like, well, what do you want out of NASCAR? Look at that battle between Kyle Larson and Kevin Harvick, and that's what I want out of NASCAR. That was fantastic. You had two drivers at the top of their game, dueling through lap traffic, fighting for the bottom of the track, fighting for the best groove, chopping each other off. But I never thought it really got dirty. I mean, that was about as hard racing as it got. I know Larson bitched on the radio, but to be honest, if you had in-car radio communication with Rusty Wallace and Dale Earnhardt and 1993, you probably would have heard them bitching about each other too. That's just the era we live in. I thought the racing was fantastic between those two. They swapped the lead back and forth, which was very surprising considering what we saw most of the rest of the race. And there wasn't really anything I could attribute that to the package specifically. Probably the one thing I would attribute to it, which I'm going to touch on later, was the amount of effect a lapped car and a lapped vehicle has on a leader when they come up behind them. That definitely helped a little bit in terms of that battle, making it as good as it was. But I think it was just two great drivers, two dominant cars, and going at it on a track that favors drivers who are really talented, like Kevin Harvick and Kyle Larson. So now we get into where I think the package, and in a lot of ways, I think I predicted this stuff as far back as when they started first talking about this, is that, well, I'll say this to start off. This is kind of a general statement. Darrell Waltrip, by the way, boy, Fox Sports, I called them carnival barkers in the Daytona 500 video. I'm going to call them carnival barkers again. Good Lord. Y'all need to, take some journalism classes, because God almighty, the brown nosing is awful. Darrell Waltrip at Daytona claimed that Atlanta was going to be exactly like Daytona. And then Atlanta was virtually the opposite race of Daytona. And then Darrell Waltrip had the audacity to say, well, the package is a success. Well, not even by your own definition was it a success, because it didn't do the thing you expected it to do. And expectations are another thing I want to talk about. What did NASCAR fans expect here? What did they want? Because if you wanted a lot of upfront competition, if you wanted a lot of different leaders, you didn't really get it. You had cars able to really get a gigantic lead. Outside of the one stint where you had Larson and Harvick really battling for the lead, you had Eric Almirola get the lead and pull away. You had Kevin Harvick get the lead and pull away. You had Kyle Larson get the lead and pull away. And at the end of the race, Brad Keselowski got the lead and pulled away until his tires started going away, and then Martin Truex Jr. caught him. But there was definitely a pattern that you could establish there where it was still the same Atlanta where you had dominant cars. The difference was the gaps were different. Instead of 12 seconds like it was last year, it was 2.5 to 3 seconds. The cars were closer together. Was it better racing than it was last year? I don't think it was. And it's kind of the illusionary thing. It's kind of the you've got the Wizard of Oz, and then you've got the little guy in the corner back here pulling the strings. It's when you look at the racing itself, it's almost a placebo effect. It really hasn't changed all that much. The gaps are closer. It is closer racing. You cannot deny that. Is it better racing? That's hard to say. Because I will say, again, it was a typical Atlanta race. It was a better Atlanta race than last year. I think most people would be able to say that. But was it so much better that it was extraordinary? I don't think it was. And that's where we kind of get into that problem is why I mean, was this NASCAR's objective all along to provide a placebo effect? Because I think NASCAR fans, or at least the guys like Kamikaze Games, wanted this to be a straight up entertainment package where you had lead changes constantly, the leader's a sitting duck, a lot like the Indy 500 in 2013. I think that's what a lot of people wanted to see. Cars all close together, passing being fairly easy, a lot of small names up at the front, and you saw some mid-pack guys get about 5th or 6th, but that's about as far up as they got throughout the day. And this is something that we really, really saw in this package, and this is the thing that I think is going to really start to show when you get to tracks that have a lot of grip, is that once you got up to about 3rd or 4th place in line, you were pretty much stuck. The top 3 or 4 cars were definitely superior. They were definitely able to stay ahead. You really couldn't catch or pass anybody. Again, I look to the second or the final stint of the race, in particular for this, I should say. You saw when they threw the final restart, you saw a lot of guys up front who had not been up front all day, and the guys like Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, they had been near the front, but they weren't front runners throughout the day. Suddenly, they're up front, and none of the guys behind them are passing them. Granted, Kevin Harvick had a mechanical failure, but in reality, the only way Truex was really able to get back up to Keselowski was the fact that guys like Logano dropped off of the track with issues instead of actually passing them on track. Another way this was exposed, passing particularly back in the back of the pack, was very difficult. Even if you have the best car, was Kyle Larson. Led the most laps in the race, got a pit lane penalty, was put about 21st on the restart, and only got as high as 18th by the end of the race or something like that. It was pretty clear that it was pretty hard to pass, especially once the field got going again. And one of the reasons for that is the lack of throttle response. I think that's one of the big keys. There's another big key, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Lack of throttle response was definitely a big issue. The race for the front runners was more or less flat out, at least until the last couple of laps of the stint where they really had to start lifting off the gas. But if you had to lift off the gas, you really struggled. You immediately went to the back. We saw, and again, this was kind of the Atlanta Motor Speedway being Atlanta Motor Speedway, you saw a gigantic pack for the first maybe lap and a half, maybe even the first half a lap on a restart. But as soon as they got into turn 3 and 4 wide, usually the top 2 lanes of cars, if they were 3 wide in there or maybe even 2 wide, even if they challenged for half a lap, would get around to turn 3 and they would get loose and they would have to lift. And as soon as they lifted, I mean, Kurt Busch, my God, he went straight to the back. He was started second and just immediately, it was like he hit the brakes, went straight to the back. Momentum is an absolute key now. And while the racing isn't like a restrictor plate race, the momentum is like a restrictor plate race. If you lift off the gas, you're toast. And in fact, in a lot of ways, that's one of the things, again, like I said, contributed to the Larson-Harvick thing because of how lap traffic affected the leaders. Dirty air. We're going to talk about it because there was a key point in the race where even Jeff Gordon pointed out, as soon as Kevin Harvick would get up behind somebody, you'd almost hear like an impact sound. It sounded like he got hit by a rock or something. And that, Jeff Gordon explained, was the air, the turbulence. And turbulence, again, as someone who's an open wheel racing fan, turbulence is the thing that prevents passing. It's the thing that makes it difficult to follow another car. It makes it difficult to get underneath them, specifically in a corner, and run side by side with another car. So this package produces a lot of turbulence. And when a leader, even though they have the best car, they're pulling away stock free, lock, stock, and barrel, they get up behind a Starcom car and then suddenly they lose 2 or 3 seconds a lap. That's a problem. Is it going to be much of a problem when you get to Las Vegas? Probably not. But here's the other problem. when you start talking about what the fans want, what the fans expect, everybody's building up this Las Vegas race, or at least the people who are staunchly defending the package. They're building it up like it's going to be Talladega 2001, and it's going to be this wild, crazy 3 and 4 wide race all the time. You hear Regan Smith, I think, said that at the end of the broadcast yesterday. It's not going to be like that. What's going to happen is you're going to get 3 or 4 guys that are going to get out front. They're going to have the strongest cars, and because the whole pack's going to be more or less stuck together for the entire race, you're not going to get lap traffic, so those guys are going to be unabated and will be able to run around the bottom or run around the top, whichever is the fastest way around the track. They will control the race. They will go flat out, and outside of getting leapfrogged into the pits on a strategy move or getting outfoxed in fuel mileage, the guys who start the race up front are probably going to end the race up front. That's probably what's going to happen. Will you see 2 and 3 wide racing for the lead? I have a hard time thinking about it. I just don't know. That is the key. And I will do a follow-up video when we get to Las Vegas and kind of give you my thoughts and what I got right and what I got wrong. But it definitely seems like dirty air is a huge factor. And unfortunately, with the lack of horsepower, the tapered spacer, all that stuff, when you lift off the throttle, you get in trouble, and it really causes a lot of problems. Was this... Do I think the package improved the show? No, I don't think it did. That's kind of my conclusion here. It was a typical Atlanta race. You may like that, you may hate that. But, again, there are some troubles, and it's the things that we thought were going to be the issues seem to be the issues that may end up hurting this package. I don't know. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe you'll be able to go from 18th to 1st at Las Vegas if you have the best car. I don't know. But I feel like it's probably not going to be that way. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I'm sure you've already shared them down in the comments section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsport and NASCAR content, and we'll see you in the next video.